Perfect. Okie dokie, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. My name is Meldon Bektik at your service today for the presentation. What I wanted to talk about today was something a little different than what everyone else has been doing. I wanted to talk about, because right now I'm doing research in the lab with haptics and VR and stuff like that. And one thing that I'm interested in is using games as a way of rehabilitation. And so I found an article that talked about serious game platform with haptic feedback for EMG monitoring for upper limb rehabilitation and smoothing qualifications on spinal cord injury patients. So we're just going to jump into some keywords that we should know about throughout it, mainly because I'm going to butcher electromyography a bunch, and I wanted to avoid that, so we're just going to call it EMG for short. But to start, we're going to go into what cervical spinal cord injury is. Mainly, it's a neurological disease that produces impairments of the upper limb functions of the body. And then for electromyography, EMG, it's pretty much a way of recording muscle muscle stretching and such as that through electrodes. I mean, so when your muscle flexes or moves, whenever you move your arm, you get a little electrical pulse through there. And we're going to use this to record that, so it can help people with some SCI. And then what a serious game is, just so we're all on the same page. A serious game is pretty much a game made not just for entertainment, such as in our case is going to be used for rehabilitation. So we're just going to jump into it. A broad little brush stroke of what we're going to be talking about. Pretty much the article talks about a virtual reality platform using 3 serious games that will help people with upper limb rehabilitation through SCI using EMG monitoring, so that the therapists and patients can find out how their progress is doing and such and such. So the things that were used for the platform that they created for this was a Navant Falcon, which is the haptic device right there, which is similar to a mouse, but if it was 3D, and it gives you haptic force depending on what objects you touch within the virtual space. A myogester armband, which is kind of like the closest thing that I could find that I could relate it to is kind of like a blood pressure monitor, but instead of checking your blood pressure, it checks for any electrical pulses within the arm, such as when you stretch your arm out or flex it in, things like that would cause an electrical pulse that we can read from it. And the platform they used to develop all of this within was the Unity game engine. So the basic gist of what they had to initially do when developing a serious game was they had to make a virtual end effector, which is pretty much where the endpoint of the haptic device relates to the movement and positioning of the pointer object or the object that'll be interacting within the virtual space inside of the Unity game engine. And by doing this, you just this is done by using a piece of software that is connected to the Falcon already developed for it beforehand that can cooperate with the Unity game engine. And all it really does is just whenever the position of the Falcon is updated within a 1000 kilohertz per second frame rate, the object within the game scene will also update, so you have that one-to-one position and movement, so it doesn't confuse the patients when they're doing these serious games. And most of the therapeutic games that they had to make for these experiments were prescribed by the doctor, by the professionals, therapists, saying that the serious games should influence such as some muscle training for people who have struggled with the right side of their body, or stabilizing their movement so they can perform more straight lines instead of curving and such. But if we go into the first game that they developed for rehabilitation, the first one's based off path guidance exercise. which, as you can see in the image, the goal is the user uses the pencil and they want blue points, all of them red color, and you can see the how straight of a line a user can do, especially when they have a condition that impairs their limb movement. So this would be able to, and the experiment is done, what I'll talk about later down the road, there's healthy and non-healthy users, and we can see the data down the road. But what happens once the user goes outside of the red line, the haptic device will provide force feedback to slowly push the user back in place to where they should be going. And we can use this to see how many times going outside of the line, how much over time this improves. For serious, oh, all right. But anyway, sorry about that, everybody. Things happen. But for serious game development, one thing that we have to consider when using a haptic device, which is similar to a three-dimensional, it's like a mouse with 3D, is we have to make sure we keep the relationship with the Cartesians within Unity, which is the platform they're using right now, and the coordinates of the virtual haptic device in tow with each other so that it's one-to-one, and so you don't have an awkward moment of I'm moving it right, but it's slightly more to the left than where I am in position of the world space of the scene. So it's something they have to do, but thankfully for the Fulvit Falcon, it already has something already pre-built that works with Unity since it's a common engine used for haptic research. So that kind of covers that basis to a degree. And then another aspect of the development for this article was that they needed to talk with the therapist so they could design the therapeutic senses and processes that are needed for the game, such as like being strength training for their arms or stability training, so straight line and so on and so on. So you have to kind of tailor make all of them for specific instances of what is necessary. And one of the games that was created using this methodology was a rehabilitation game called Follow the Path. As the name entails, the idea is that you start at one of the blue points, and the goal is to go to all of the blue points from there. And as you go through the red lines, they'll start to turn into a maroon-ish color, saying that you've completed it. And the point of this one is to make sure that path guidance of the user is more accurate and improve this over time. So if the user goes outside of the lines, what will happen is the haptic device will provide force feedback to force the user to go back to the path, allowing for the patients to develop a sense or at least more stability within their arms. So when they're moving, trying to draw a straight line or trying to do something within a straight line, they'll have an easier time. Within the article, they talk about the force feedback method they used for it, which is Hooke's law, which is FV is the force feedback, while T is the sampling time, KT would be the specific instance in the discrete method. So within the entire sampling of the force feedback from the user or the positioning of the user, I mean, it will provide you with distinct measures of force depending on how far they are or within what range they are and such. While the delta X KT would be the distance to the edge of the path, and then the KV would be the stiffness or elasticity. So the further out you go, the harder it is to move, and the closer in you are, the easier it is to move. So this will slowly, this method would enforce the user to stay within the path by forcing them to not be able to move any further out of the path, kind of curving their arms trajectory in a sense. And then the second game they made for rehabilitation is banana picking. The idea is that with the haptic device, you will control the basket that you see in the image right here. You'll control this by moving it around the scene within the three-dimensional scene and collect bananas as they fall from the branches. And then as you collect more bananas within the basket, it will cause the basket to become much more stiff to move around due to the simulated weight within the basket, making it harder and harder. So the patients that have to go to the left side of the screen to drop them off so they can continue to pick up more bananas. And then you would do this within a 2-minute span to see how many bananas you can pick up within the time frame. And the idea of this would be that as you play, it would test how much resistance your arm can handle at the time. And over time, the idea would be that over time, your arm would get used to it and develop more and be able to maintain a larger amount of stiffness before having to drop off the bananas. And this will also show, because later on we'll see that it measures the speed at which the device is being accelerated at. It will show that how smoothly the users can control the device within the scene and how haptically they have to haphazardly. I mean, they would have to move around within the scene trying to keep up with the bananas. And of course, it made it so that the bananas fall at a moderate rate, so you don't have to rush consistently. But this will show in an unhealthy individual that they have difficulties moving from one side to the other side due to either the resistance or due to just impairments within motor function in the right side of their arm. And the formula used to simulate the viscosity of resistance within the scene is similar to Hokin's, but slightly different. You're still using FV for force, but it's, and T for sampling, but in KT for specific instance in the discrete domain. But instead, you'll have X instead of delta X for velocity of the end effector, which is the pointer of the haptic device again, if we remember that from before. And then BV is just a constant reference to viscosity, or how much we want to keep the consistency of weight over time and stuff like that, like one banana being like, for instance, 1 pound, and we just keep adding that over and over and over again, and so on. And then so that's the gist of the banana picking one. We'll go into the results later, but the third one that they implemented was collecting stars, which is a kind of a mix of both of the follow path and banana picking one, in the sense of it's supposed to be resistance training as well as linearity of movement to show that they can maintain their arms in a linear path. So the idea of the game is that the user has to start from the center of the screen, like where Earth is, and move the rocket to the stars, it'll destroy the star, and then they have to move their arm back to the center of the screen, and then they can continue on back and forth repeating this motion. The idea is that as they stay in the center, there is no resistance, and then as they move out closer to the stars, there's more and more resistance. And often noticed by patients that have these conditions, such as SCI, they often just instead of moving straight across with a linear path, they'll more often try to curve instead to grab things because of the force resistance. And this will provide them with the assistance they need to develop a more linear movement within their arms, and slowly develop a little more muscle strength within there as well, so they can maintain that linear movement over time. And the same methodology is used as in the follow path, where they used Hokin's law to provide the force feedback to the user and the patients. And then after that, we can kind of go into the experimental setups that they did. For the experiments, what they did, all the participants were right-handed. The end effector was of the Novak function was held in the right hand by everyone, and the myogester armband was all placed on the same arm, at the forearm specifically, with the electrodes attached in the same position for everyone. And to maintain consistency, everyone did 2 minutes on each game specifically, with a maximum of 4.5 newtons to each user. So that way it's a happy middle ground. It's not too strong, not too weak, so everyone can feel it, and it wouldn't be too much for the unhealthy patients that were used for the experiment. And we can go down to see the results here. We can, for the results of the follow path one, the time spent in the performance of tasks was different for the healthy individuals, which was 4, and then the unhealthy individuals was also 4 patient participants for that. And as we can see, there is a drastic number difference between them in the amount of time it took for the healthy individuals, of course, compared to the unhealthy individuals to complete the following path, game and exercise. Because most of the time, the patients that the SCI patients needed more time to complete the task due to them often going out of the edge, as you can see here. It took a healthy individual only left the path about an average of 2.7 times, while an unhealthy individual was 13.75 times they left the path, which led to a increased time at forcing them to realign and continue on within the path. So the experiment shows that the individuals do have a struggle with this, and it does show that that the game does demonstrate that that it can identify the issue, and then later on, once we do the 2 and 1, we'll see that we can actually influence the way that the linearity of their paths are over time. Because for the banana picking one, it's mainly for this one, they wanted to show that the speed in between grabbing, collecting, and dropping bananas off with the resistance over time. As you can see, in the blue is the healthy individual, while the red is the unhealthy individual. We could see that in the blue, there are only a few major spikes where it took them more time to go from, took them more time to rush over and grab bananas and stuff like that. The main reasoning for it is that the healthy individual is able to maintain a better grasp of the bananas at a higher resistance level, while the individuals with SCI had to do much more stops at the left-hand side to drop them off, and then rush back over to pick up more falling bananas before they hit the ground and disappear, showing that they have a much harder time maintaining the needed amount of arm strength to resist the resistance from collecting more bananas over time. So that is something that this can provide over time. As they continue to do this more and more, they can adjust to the newtons, force that's provided, and then increase their arm strength. But if we go down to the collecting stars results, we can see that this is a healthy individual and this is an SCI individual. And what we see here is that the healthy individual can keep a more straight position going in and out to each of the stars, and then returning to the center, going out again, turning to the center, going out again, returning to the center, going out. But if we see with an unhealthy individual, they have a much harder time going in and out because of the resistance, and especially when we go to the lower right hand side, we see them doing a lot more curving here, which is a common thing with people with SCI due to the force, resulting in them, because of the pain that would be caused from trying to turn that way and the maneuverability issues they would have to sweep with the device instead of going straight down. And with this, we can see that when they're going from the center to the left-hand side, we can see they're able to maintain a straight line here, and it slowly devolves more onto the right side. So you can see that it impacts them more on the right than the left to a degree. So what we can do is we can provide them more training and more resistance for the right side. And then if we go down, we can see the EMG recordings, which is the electrical pulses that resulted from the arm as the muscles relaxed and tightened to perform certain actions, such as stretching it out or moving the device and such. As we can see, the healthy individual, it's much lower. So that means they had a much easier time, which means they didn't have to strain their muscles as much to perform the actions. While on the SCI patient, we see it spiking up and down, up and down, up and down a lot more forcefully, similar to the graph that they had before. The showing that at around the 40-second interval right about here, we see them probably having a lot more bananas within the bag, causing a lot more resistance. And then it drops down really quite quickly, meaning that they had to drop the bananas off so they could have a less resistance to continue the game quickly and return to picking bananas more and more. Same thing happens with the following path. We see that these are a little more similar due to the force that is provided to stay within the path. So we could see that this shows that the force feedback does assist a patient with SCI, providing a more natural arm movements and not as strained as it normally is, such as with the banana picking one. And then we can also see that again with the collecting stars one, where it's the healthy individuals are able to keep a steady, relaxed arm, while the unhealthy SCI patient is struggling much more with the force that's pushing them away from the stars, resulting in a lot more movement, especially when they're trying to curve to collect a star than to just go straight forward and get it. And so overall, what they've learned is that all the devices of the platform were, of course, they were low cost. It's not like we're using a full-on VR headset and such like that, which would be somewhat costly with a feedback device. But it's much more easily adaptable for people. And it's much easier than putting on a bunch of bulky equipment for a short span of time. And it takes less time for them to prepare for something that is for a simple game like this. But we also found out that the configure options used in this research lab to create different virtual scenarios, such as we saw with the path following, banana picking, and the destroying the stars one that they had. So we can personalize this more for each different patient within the medical field. And the final thing is that the final design generates a good haptic response and reliable monitoring of the muscle contractions. This, which can provide the therapists and the medical professionals a good way of monitoring their patients and the rehabilitation process over the span of the entire duration of their stay at the hospital, or their equivalent amount of time that they need to stay within the research of their condition to find out if they have SCI, or if they need to, if there are any major improvements that can be done for the SCI condition of these patients. And that should, yeah,